I'm Maxine Frost with Classical King FM, Seattle's classical choice, 98.1 King FM and online at king.org. And in October of 2009, I interviewed Seattle-based concert guitarist Michael Partington just ahead of the release of his CD, Resonance. And it must be really a treat to be able to work with a composer. You know, it's almost like you're collaborating on a piece with Stephen Goss.
You are, for sure. And actually, Stephen really believes that, the idea that there is a real artist-composer collaboration. You know, the piece evolves because of the input of the performer. And, you know, the Ponce actually is an interesting example of music that was written for Segovia by a non-guitarist. And Segovia would often edit this music. And there's some controversy surrounding that. Some people believe that, you know, we ought to play the manuscript version of the piece, that,
right,
you know, what the composer intended. I think in a lot of cases, Segovia really improved the music. You know, he understood the instrument really well. And in Ponce's case, they were such close friends that I think we really have to believe that the edition that is published, that has, you know, Segovia's input, probably, almost certainly was approved by Ponce, and really is the culmination of the two of them. And actually the version that I do, there is a published version, the so-called Segovia edition. Recently the manuscript has also been published, and I actually do just a little bit of mixing and matching. There are a couple of things in the manuscript that I think I kind of wish it had stayed that way, so I put those in. So I probably will offend some minority of guitarists, but I believe that the artist has a certain degree of freedom. I recently discovered Nick Hornby has a new book out.
Really?
That sort of addresses this issue. It's called Juliet Naked, and it's about a sort of a mythical pop star who releases an album in the 80s that has a cult following, and then 20 years later they release an acoustic version of this album. And the story focuses on this couple, and the guy thinks that the acoustic version is somehow better because it's more pure, it's closer to the original artist's vision, and his girlfriend thinks that the album from the 80s with all the production and the band and everything is better because the ideas have become fully fleshed out. And it's just an interesting argument about art and about how it develops. And I think in the book, this mythical pop star contacts the girlfriend and says, "You're right."
Really?
That in fact, you know, the acoustic album was just the beginning. And, you know, as we worked on the ideas and fleshed them out, they became better. And I certainly think that in a lot of cases that can be true. You know, no disrespect to a composer, but it's also part of a composer's art that they will have an idea and it will develop, and they get input from other sources, and you know, we don't have to believe that what they write is the gospel truth.
Right.
And Stephen certainly with a number of other performers, you know, he really welcomes input from the artists that he writes the music for. You know, is certainly willing to make changes. Although I did discover he wrote a piece for David Russell, and he pretty much capitulated to all of David's requests.
Oh, really?
But he only capitulated to a couple of mine.
Really?
But no, that's fun. But yeah, no, of course he's very interested. You know, he's a composer. He's not a performer.
Right.
And certain things, you know, you might have an idea of, you know, wouldn't it be great if the music sounded like this? And then the performer says, well, you know what? You just can't really do that. It's not going to happen. How about if we did this? It would create the same effect or a similar effect, but in a different way.
You mean a composer can ask you to just do something that's not technically possible? Or?
Oh, definitely in the case of the guitar, because the guitar is, it has unique limitations, and if you don't really understand the guitar well, it's very common that a composer will write something technically impossible. Stephen Goss actually is a guitarist, so he doesn't write things that are impossible. He just sometimes writes things that are unreasonable.
Yeah.
But no, it's very common. Julian Bream, who commissioned a huge amount of work from composers in the sort of the middle and the later part of the 20th century, famously said that Britten's Nocturnal, which was a piece that Benjamin Britten wrote for him, was the only piece written by a non-guitarist composer that he didn't have to do any correcting.
Wow.
And it actually took Britten. I mean, Britten wrote 3 works for guitar, a set of folk song variations, a set of a song cycle, songs from the Chinese, and then eventually the solo piece. And Britton also spent an awful lot of time learning the instrument and
Really?
trying to understand what was possible and what was not. His pieces are tremendous guitar writing, partly because he uses the guitar in an unusual way. Because he wasn't a guitarist, I think guitar composers often resort to or fall back on certain guitaristic practices that potentially limit their compositional ideas. It's not always the case, but it's certainly not uncommon. Stephen Goss, I don't think, is one of those composers. Certainly, his music's really awkward to play.
Does it?
It sounds very natural and very guitaristic, but when you play it, you're thinking, really, this guy played the guitar? Why does he want me to do that? But he certainly knows what he's doing.
I often wondered how people who write for the orchestra do that, because how can you become an expert in every single instrument?
Well, not to denigrate the other instruments, but I think their general usage is much more common, much more straightforward. And composers certainly, serious composers, if they, actually go to school and study at a university or a college or something like that. But even if they don't, there are still many resources about orchestration and about how to incorporate instruments and what instruments can do and ways of combining them. Actually, interestingly, Berlioz has a very well-known and well-respected treatise on orchestration. And a little fact that not many people know, Berlioz played the guitar, and I don't think he played the piano, which apparently I haven't seen it, but apparently in his treatise on orchestration, he devotes 3 pages to the guitar,
Really?
whereas everything else gets about a paragraph. So, and there are several books that have been written for non-guitarist composers about composing for the guitar, because it has such odd characteristics. Many of them are limitations, but some of them are advantages that if a composer doesn't really understand the instrument, they won't necessarily be able to take advantage of them. You can't write for the instrument like it's a piano.
Right.
It's not.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to write music that really is well suited to the guitar. And a composer like Ponce and several of the other composers of the Segovia era who are not guitarists, Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco is another of my favorites, who, although he didn't play the instrument, really managed to write music that was very effective on the instrument and probably wouldn't sound anywhere like as good on any other instrument. If you played it on the piano, it would lose some of its unique beauty.
Maxime Frost with King FM in Seattle, chatting with Michael Partington ahead of the release of his CD Resonance, available from CD Baby.